We're all good. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to all of you. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome you to this second session of the Management of Shared Water Resources for Peace and Cooperation seminar. My name is Fabrice Fretz. I work for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for this session today. This hybrid session, yesterday's session was a purely online one, will explore the role of different basin organizations in fostering cooperation and shared prosperity. Some questions that we hope to answer include: what is the role of basin organizations and how do we leverage them better? How can we improve organizational effectiveness in sustainable water management? And what innovations can we introduce to ensure that water remains a source of collaboration rather than conflict? You'll be hearing from a distinguished panel of experts later in this session who will share their insights on the topic. But before we move into the opening remarks, the keynote speech, and their presentations, I'd like to remind our virtual participants that we'll be taking questions via the chat as well. So please feel free to engage with us throughout the session. And also please know that we will be continuing our seminar tomorrow on Wednesday with a third session, which will be a workshop on hydro diplomacy and regional water resources management. I hope to see many of you there as well. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Yogita Mamsen, who is the Global Solutions Manager for the World Bank Water Global Practice, and to welcome her on stage for some opening remarks. Mrs. Mamsen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabrice. I'm honored to be here with you to discuss the role of river basin organizations in supporting transboundary water management processes and their broader implications for regional stability and development. As we all know, climate change, population growth, uneven economic development are all placing immense pressures on our transboundary freshwater resources. By 2050, the number of people living in water-stressed transboundary basins could double, a situation further exacerbated by lack of institutional cooperation. Alarmingly, more than half of the world's 310 international river basins and almost all transboundary aquifers lack formal agreements for shared management. In this context, basin organizations emerge as key pillars of international and regional water governance. They provide a crucial platform for countries to exchange information, coordinate efforts, and achieve not just water security, but also broader development objectives. Despite their importance, RBOs often lack visibility among development practitioners and policymakers, particularly in terms of their benefits for livelihood, development, and conflict prevention. The recent Global Forum on Transboundary Water Cooperation for Climate and Development, which was hosted by the World Bank, reinforced the fundamental importance of RBOs in addressing joint development priorities and delivering regional and global public goods through their effective management of transboundary waters. The forum highlighted the need to enhance the visibility of RBOs, ensure their financial sustainability, and support their role in fostering cooperation and preventing water from being a source of tension. As pressure on water resources continue to rise, the institutional capacity of RBOs proves fundamental in responding adequately and ensuring that water remains a source of collaboration rather than conflict. I'm really excited to learn from all of you, more from all of you in this space, and look forward to this very interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mumson, for setting the stage. I would like now to invite Mr. Kieran O'Quinn, who is the Center Director of MEDREC, based in Muscat, for the keynote speech of this session. Mr. MEDREC, please. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see you all here. My name is Ciarán O'Quinn. I'm the Centre Director of MEDREC, an international organisation headquartered in Muscat in Oman, with a mandate from 11 countries, not one of whom has diplomatic relations with all the others, to be a model organisation for states to use transboundary environmental issues in the service of a peace process. So I've been asked here today to really spell out the issues for RBOs and other international organisations and institutions in using water for peace. So how do organisations use water for peace? And that would sound quite easy because that's my day job, but actually it's highly problematic because water for peace remains a platitude. It's not a practice, it's not a policy, it's not actually today a real focus of positive peace in the world. There have been no real interstate water wars we know about. In peace processes, water is what we call a dependent variable. Water cooperation tends to follow the shape of the peace process, the political economy, rather than shaping the peace process itself. The whole idea of liberal functionalism, that's this idea that we engage in apolitical, technical cooperation and this magically turns into peace. There's no real proof of that anywhere on earth, and yet we talk about it and base whole organisations on it. As we see in the Ukraine and we see in Palestine, water has been used as much for war as for peace. There's nothing natural about water that makes it a tool for peace. And water, when we look at the 19th century and all of the great work done on the Danube and the Rhine and all of these things, it didn't stop wars. Okay? So does that mean we give up? No, it doesn't. Because those of us lucky enough to work in RBOs and international organisations of water, we work at the intersection of two great things. One is regional and international cooperation, international relations, and the other one is the environment. And this space we are so lucky to work in is very important because of the two grand challenges we face as humanity. One has been mentioned before in the previous speech, global inequality, the haves and the have-not, the global distribution of wealth, and it has to be said, not just wealth, but self-determination and other issues. And on the other hand, climate change and climate degradation. There's three implications already we see in our lives: large-scale migration, migration, the feeling of people who are the have-nots that want to rebel against this system, that really are forcing us into activity now. What RBOs can do, and what RBOs are very good at, is creating niche islands of cooperation. Really, really good islands of cooperation that seem to be quite impervious to politics. What we can't say is they spill over to politics. We can't say that the Locks Agency in Ireland created the Irish peace process, or between India and Pakistan, water actually created peace. No, it didn't. But they create really, really resilient islands of cooperation. And they're actually very, very important because these are our bridgeheads in the future. So what we need going forward are models of how to use water for peace and other transboundary environmental issues for peace. Okay? We're not there yet. But as Samuel Beckett said, we fail better, and we fail again. We just have to keep going. And that's what we're trying to do in MEDREC. And I'll just talk you through some of the issues we've had to face with. There's 7 real issues in taking a technocratic organisation. We took an organisation established on the Madrid process back in the 1990s, and we had to totally reinvent it about 10 years ago. And that process, we had to really thoroughly go through all the issues that would affect someone trying to use water for peace. And I think they're a good tool for anybody else embarking on the same route. The first one to watch out for, and these are behavioural as much as technical. One of the issues with this area is it's too technocratic. It's run by engineers and scientists and not diplomats and not politicians, okay? So we have to be very careful for that. But the first thing to look out for is the rational reality gap. The rational reality gap is what looks very, very rational in a European headquarters. What looks very good in Dublin may not work in Den Panzer. What looks very good in Paris may not work well in Palestine. So you have to have that local ownership. You have to have diversity in your approaches. And not just cultural diversity, not just local ownership, but a diversity of skills. Not just hydrologists and scientists, but diplomats, conflict resolution experts and all of that. In MEDREC, what we've done is we've insisted that all of the countries that are part of MEDREC own the organisation. They are joint owners, joint guarantors and co-equal partners. The second thing to watch out for is this very, very important behavioural force that creeps into any organisation involving human beings, is the solution looking for a problem. It's from behavioural psychology. Peace processes, international relations, suck in individuals who try to, high-profile organisations, high-profile initiatives. What you really need for this type of work are systems. So we have a systems-based approach rather than an individual, a bureaucratic approach rather than a charismatic approach, okay? So a system is much more resilient, a system will be much more long-term, and a system is much more open and visible to all sides in a conflict. So your Common Regard in RBO is a system, not an individual NGO-led initiative. It's a very, very resilient system. Third point to watch out for is transboundary cooperation does not equal peace. Transboundary cooperation can equal peace, but it can also be neo-colonialism, it can also be dependency, it can also be very, very political, masking as apolitical. So you have to understand that these things are very, very political and arm yourself and understand the political dimensions of what you're doing. The fourth thing in this area is, and this is counterintuitive to a lot of people, is that government is the operating system of these activities. Our RBOs are legitimised by governments. Peace processes at a high level end up usually with a bit of paper lodged at the United Nations. And I know Alessandro and others will say that everybody has to be a diplomat, that everybody has to, and that's true. But you have to have that as a diversity. You also have, it's one of the strangest things I've seen, that some states send diplomats to do water negotiations and other states send engineers. A diplomat will always kill an engineer in a negotiation. It's just the way it is. A diplomat can't dig a well, but an engineer can't negotiate a diplomatic treaty. It's just the way it is. And this is so intuitive to me, but for many in this sector, they don't seem to get that. The most important thing advice I would give to anybody is that ignoring politics is political. Okay? If you ignore politics, you are saying, I agree with the dominant power structure, I agree with the status quo. At an absolute minimum, you have to create, in one of these multilateral frameworks or international frameworks, you have to create a contact based on equality as an absolute minimum. That normative power of equality is actually what's really important in international relations. Beyond that, you can move into the technical and you can move into the social. And I always say to people, a good political economy analysis is much more important than an engineering analysis in any of these programs to start off. 5 or 6, the academy is not society. We all know that with per diems and flights, we can get 1,000 scientists, engineers and academics from any different country together in a room for days and days and days. But so what? Okay, so what? Your initiative has to be linked to a broader peace process. There's no point having a silo of water. It has to be linked to a broader peace process. So the academy is not society. The last one then is that in this space we have to accept that there is an institutional lacuna. It is nobody's job to do this. Okay? And that means we're making mistakes, we're failing again, we're failing better, but we're failing, okay? This world does not yet today have an agreed model on how to use water and peace. We're all running around in circles making things up. But if you are designing a peace process right now today, it is year zero. You have no off-the-shelf model, and that's why in MEDREC we've tried to develop a model based on, we've taken the parts of the Irish peace process. All states agreed to be joint owners, joint guarantors and co-equal partners in the process. Normative frameworks about equality of participation at a multilateral level. Above that then, finding out are there capacity disparities between member countries, fixing them, and only then, at stage 4, do you get into face-to-face core party negotiations, talking, anything like that. And that's what comes first. Whereas people from engineering backgrounds all tend to go straight for that, without the normative stuff, without the political stuff, and it doesn't work. So I'm going to leave it there with just 5 things. The rational reality gap, the solution looking for a problem, transboundary cooperation is not peace, government is the operating system, ignoring politics is political, the academy is not society, and we have an institutional lacuna in this area. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Quinn, for your comments and reality check. And it's also actually very encouraging, especially coming from somebody who works in a region where there is no shortage of tension. We now move on to presentations, which will be followed by a panel discussion. So I will invite one after one our panelists to make their presentation, and then once they're finished with their presentation, to please take a seat here on stage. Our first presenter is Mr. Alejandro Iza, who is the director of the IUCN Environmental Law Center. He's also co-director of IUCN's Bridge, that stands for Building River Dialogue and Governance Program. Mr. Iza, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and good afternoon, everybody. I think that my colleague from MEDREC has said already what I wanted to say, but still I'm going to say that, believe me. Let me start with cooperation. And let me say that, in my view, cooperation in shared basins takes place, you know that, at different levels, between riparian states, within subnational entities, municipalities, communities. Upwards, the states, it happens, as you already said that, also within regional and sub-regional entities, global processes that relate to water but go beyond water. Because we talk about water in climate change, we talk about water in issues relating to desertification, to biodiversity, to human rights as well. Indeed, and all these multilateral processes relate to water and various subjects beyond water. The multi-stake, multi-level reality of cooperation requires the intervention of multiple stakeholders at different levels. And I think this has to do also with the way in which we perceive river basin and lake basins organizations. And this variation, in my view, depends on the reality of each basin. So there is no one size that fits all the basins around the world. There is no one perfect solution that fits all the basins. It is true that water agreements are usually negotiated by diplomats. But to be effective, these agreements, to deliver their practical objectives, they need to be implemented by a myriad of other actors that are not necessarily diplomats, and therefore water diplomacy, I will say, is not only the field of career diplomats. Also, I think, and it was said a couple of days ago by a person that is present in this room, we need to move away also from the perception that only those that understand water deal with water. Water is a resource with multiple faces and with multiple facets, and therefore requires an intervention of multiple decision makers and multiple actors, from the field of environment, from the field of climate change, agriculture, trade, health, transportation, tourism, human rights, indigenous peoples, etc., etc. The list can go on and on. On the basin institutions, which is the subject matter of this dialogue, this discussion, in my experience, the definition of an adequate setting for that depends on factors like, first, existing frameworks. In other words, the policies, the legals, the joint platforms to serve as point of departure for countries to cooperate, to initiate a journey. The interdependencies between the states. What is it actually the basis for that river basin or lake basin organization? The existing cooperative arrangements between the stakeholders in the basins, not only the states, I'm talking about the broader spectrum of stakeholders beyond the states. And you will hear that from me every now and then and all the time. And the relevance of water within a much broader set of spectrum of natural resources in the basins. It has to do with political will, for sure, and with realistic expectations from all these stakeholders. The effectiveness of these institutions have to do with three, in my view, and we can discuss that if we have time in the dialogue, with three sets of capacities. First of all, the capacity of the institution to identify the challenges of the basin that is going to govern. Second, the capacity of the institution to provide solutions to those challenges. And more importantly, the capacity of the institution to adapt and to respond to all the set of unexpected scenarios and changes when needed and change the course of action if it has to do that. Allow me to highlight something that my colleague from MEDREC said. He said that I was going to talk about that. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. Some other aspects that I think are essential in water diplomacy and for institutions and diplomacy to be effective. And this is the role of civil society. Somebody said yesterday and was asking yesterday, diplomacy for whom? Is it only diplomacy for the states? The role of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, is in my view crucial because states negotiating agreements and establishing institutions should ponder upon the role of the society at large. Why? Because society at large helps diplomacy to be effective, helps decision-making to be legitimate, helps to legitimate the action that is taken by the diplomats and by the civil servants. And water, at the end of the day, is not different from nature. And this is something that I have to say because I come from IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. It's not different from nature, and we people are part from nature, are an intrinsic part of nature. There is more or less like the metaphor, the chicken or the egg, or the chicken and the egg, where cause and effect are not entirely clear. Therefore, people rights, and that's why I will continue pleading for the role of civil society, and human rights are inherent to water and to nature and closely connected to them. This does not happen by default. It is essential to operate until certain parameters governed by the rule of law, a principle that you know whereby people and all the entities, including the states, are accountable to legislation and consistent with international human rights norms and standards. This is truly simple. The rule of law is essential for nature conservation, is essential for water conservation and for sustainable development. Without it, we cannot conserve nature, which is essential to provide its services, including water. And with that, I will finish. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you very much, Alejandro, for this very clear presentation and pledge as well. Now I'd like to invite Mrs. Audrey Lejar. She is Senior Advisor on Water Governance and International Water Cooperation at the Dutch organization Deltares. She is also an active member of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. Mrs. Lejar, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. I very much relate to the first two presentations, and also saying that water diplomacy is not only for water diplomats. But I think that leaves us also with the question, how do we go about that? What can we do? And in the last 2 days of this World Water Week, we have heard that one of the challenges of transboundary water cooperation is also stakeholder engagement. And I wanted actually to reflect also on tools and methodologies. I think this is also the purpose of this seminar, to see like what is working and what can we learn. In my experience, I have worked with some participative methodologies that booked great results, not necessarily on transboundary cooperation, but I wanted to introduce it to this seminar and perhaps also reflect on how this can be adapted to the transboundary cooperation. And more specifically, I wanted to talk about participatory system analysis, in order to have a joint understanding on the links between water and the risk of conflict. This is something that the Water, Peace and Security Partnership is definitely working on. And that allows to also identify some jointly interventions. So, as I said, we have had some good experiences, and we are now looking in the literature and also talking with partners, and it seems that the examples are quite scarce. First of all, what is participatory system analysis? Well, it gathers some methodologies in which the participants actually jointly come in a process that can last several months in our experience to analyze the system and to also understand in what situation they are acting and what are the different factors that influence the system, how the elements are interacting, and therefore also identifying some new entry points that are perhaps indirect but that can actually positively influence the cooperation. And obviously, it should also create a process of trust. In our projects, we have used, especially in a collaboration with GIZ in West Africa, the process of group model building and more specifically looking at causal loop diagram. It is actually quite a simple methodology coming with the stakeholders regularly through different bilateral meetings, workshop, validation meetings, and so on, to really deconstruct the system and to look at different factors and eventually also looking at how those factors can interact with each other and influence each other positively or negatively. What is interesting with that is that it leads to a visualization of the system, but also a verbalization of the narratives, and that it facilitates the discussion. What we want to achieve with such a process, and that has also been possible through our experiences, is to quantify some of the factors through different models, hydrological models, but also modeling some human behaviors, for instance. Really looking also with the stakeholders, what are the needs they have for quantifications, what are the factors that they would like to have scenarios about, and how can we make that also visible from them. Obviously, this has to be led locally by people understanding also the system and the different input of stakeholders. We have had positive feedback on using participatory system analysis, and we decided also to evaluate this process because we wanted also to learn from it and to see how we could actually improve it, but also compare it to other approaches that we are sure some partners also use. And what we have learned from this evaluation that we conducted together with SIPRI is that in some cases, well, differently, obviously, but it did have a big impact on conflict reduction and peaceful management. It has led to some concrete interventions on the ground, and there was a recognition of an improvement also in the social relations among the parties that are involved in some tensions and in shared management of water. Some aspects that were mentioned as very important were also the bilateral meetings to really allow everyone to bring their own feelings and to therefore also contribute to the discussion that could be validated later on in a process. But also this aspect of visualization of the system was seen as something very important. What we are trying to do now is also to compare and to gather some different methodologies that are used by others so that we can advance together in the understanding of the link between water and security, but especially at the practical level, because all of us or many organizations work also on research on understanding this link between water and security, also at the transboundary level. But how do we address that in practice is something that we find limited in the literature and in our conversations. So I would like to invite you also to reflect on this stakeholder engagement in transboundary water cooperation, and perhaps to also share some of your best practices that we would be happy to use also as input for further steps in our evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Leger. And yes, please take a seat on our very intimate stage. And now I'd like to call on stage Mrs. Edith Paredes. She is the Administrative Director of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, or ACTO. ACTO is an international organization aimed at promoting sustainable development in the Amazon basin. So please, Mrs. Paredes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Uma das nossas lutas, como povos da Amazônia, é pela proteção e conservação das nossas águas e para garantir os nossos direitos e os direitos da floresta, das fontes e curso de água. Essa luta conta com o esforço de cooperação dos países amazônicos para a gestão compartilhada das águas amazônicas. Nós, povos da floresta, precisamos desse apoio para fortalecer iniciativas locais de etnodesenvolvimento e, assim, manter as florestas em pé e os nossos rios vivos e limpos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And this introduction that was a little bit disruptive is just a call and an invitation that we don't forget what drives us for our work, even if we work with water, as it was said before. It's a broader topic. It's a multi-factor, multi-level, multi-stakeholder. So it's a broader topic, but behind it, we have human beings, we have voices, we have groups, and for all of us, water is very important and is essential, but for example, at the Amazon region, and it's the same reality that all the basins face, water is essential for the people that live there, for their daily support and for their livelihoods. So it's very important that it doesn't matter what organization we represent or at what geographic area we're at, that we remind what's behind water and who is behind water. At ACTO, as a multilateral organization that it represents 8 member countries, but about 50 million of people, with a political will that, as we have heard during these days, and my prior colleagues here were talking about as well, there are several factors that could help in this transboundary water management. The political will is one. We at ACTO, as a multilateral organization, we have the political will at the highest level because we have some president's mandate, and it was strengthened and it was supported and confirmed by the ministers of foreign affairs last year in the presidential summit at Brazil. So, but still, with that political will at the highest level, there are still challenges to be driven and to face. Although that there we have a specific mandate for water management, for an integrated water management at the river basin, and it goes through the support for a network of water authorities within the region that it's actually right now working on their work plan, working on the basis for the structure to have a common vision, a regional common vision about the water, transboundary water governance. That it's, I think we have to be very proud of it. It has been years of work. I think more than 10 years to get there, but still there's a lot to be done, but at least there's a common regional vision and a collaborative vision, and that's something that should be still be strength, but I think it's a huge step forward that we've done within the transboundary water management. This is part of a process, like we said, for this water management, that some of the key factors for this is the political will, as I said, then a common vision, a collaborative vision of the management, but as well to have mutual support in the engagement of how to move and how to governance the water, the integrated water management. No, another thing that I think it's very important to put here, and that we are working at ACTO, is to work on sharing important databases and information, no, within different stakeholders. It's a huge challenge, the institutional strengthening at every country, within the countries and within the region, but sharing data, working with the different stakeholders to get all them together to work in a regional agenda and a common regional agenda. It's very important as well as challenging, because data is always missing, and in order to get the same level of data, we still need to get the same level of technical capacities in each country and within the region. And there is still a lot to be done. There's a way to go. But I think that, as we said, someone was saying here, should we stop? No. Should we just give it up? I think once we always remember what we're for, it has to give us the strength to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Paredes. I would like now to call on stage Mrs. Kim Verkries. I hope I'm not destroying your name too much. She is a project advisor at Join for Water, an international NGO supporting over 20 organizations in Africa and South America in developing solutions to protect freshwater ecosystems and improve access to water. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Fabrice. Aside from Join for Water, I am also representing our partner in the Andes region, Protos Andes, who is the main driver and coordinator of the project that I want to present today. Maybe I'll start with a very brief and quick background, because I want to take you along into a short case study, really, that reflects some of the ideas already shown today. Between Ecuador and Peru, there are 9 shared river basins. And fortunately, there is an agreement between both countries to manage those basins together. The challenge, however, is that to date, there are not a lot of practical examples of how to translate that agreement into practice. And that's exactly what we, as a consortium of partners, are trying to do in the most southern catchment, the Mayo Chinchipe Basin. And basically, the objective of our project is to implement or co-develop a governance model that connects really people together around a shared vision for the catchment, but as well create responsibility and action within the catchment. And that governance model is based on our general strategy, and that's obviously the catchment management plan, which is at the moment being developed by our partners, but together with stakeholders across the catchment. And to facilitate that collaboration between stakeholders, we've also supported and facilitated the development of a couple of extra or new spaces to foster collaboration, including a catchment assembly that meets every couple of months, a binational committee that is a smaller group that meets more regularly, as well as a binational women committee. And those spaces, they complement the existing spaces already there in the region, like the binational committee of all shared basins, and the IWRM committee is also there. Now, to engage as much different types of stakeholders as possible and to include as much different activities as possible, we've also included some tools like a binational water school. I'll come back to that later. Also community-based conservation agreements. Again, I'll come back to that in a second. And then within the region, there already existed a few regional or local water funds that help to fund the conservation actions within the region that align with the catchment management plan. But as well as that, the aim of the project is to develop a binational water fund, not to replace the local ones, but also to be an extra layer on top of it to enable the financing of cross-boundary activities that are really needed to manage the catchment. Here you see some pictures of the water schools. The water schools, in my opinion, are one of the most essential parts of the project because they really bring together different types of people from across the catchment. Here you see pictures of a water school for women that was held last year. It was women from different communities across the catchment as well as authorities. And they came together for 5 days, sharing knowledge on water, learning more on climate change, on gender roles, etc. And aside from the knowledge that was being developed or shared there, I've seen that it's, and my colleagues, they are very strong advocates of that. It's a mechanism to create relationships between people from different places, from both sides of the border. And it culminated in the development of a binational women committee who are going to all the catchment assemblies to represent the voices of women within the catchment. So it's really, the water school in itself is important, but especially the dynamics that it generates that I want to stress here. Yeah, these are some pictures of the committees and the platform. So it's huge how many people come to them. It's stakeholders ranging from communities to farmer associations, authorities, universities within the catchment. So that's that. And then finally, I mentioned it already, that another part of the governance model is also implement community-based conservation agreements. And that means that our partners go to the field, they really go into dialogue with different communities to develop small-scale conservation plans. And at the same time, they provide support to, for example, restore water systems, support the people with agroforestry techniques, sustainable cattle management, and so on. So it's a very integrated package that they agree with communities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Just be careful, there's the mic there. You might want to leave it here, and I'll pass it over then when the questions come. Thank you. Next up on our list of speakers is Mrs. Louise Ellis. She is a chartered civil engineer by background and now leads Arup's Strategic Water Services team. Louise works closely with water utilities, with regulators and governments to improve their water resilience. Louise, please, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk through a case study around cooperation on a river basin cross-border. I'm going to talk about the River Severn and Severn 2100, which is a project planning the future of water management in the River Severn catchment. The River Severn, Hafren in Welsh, is the longest river in the United Kingdom. It spans the countries of England and Wales, as well as 4 counties and 3 cities. And the River Severn partnership has formed an innovative approach to catchment governance with representatives from 26 organisations across the catchments, including the English and Welsh environmental regulators, county and city governments, NGOs, water companies, agricultural groups, community representatives, and economic development partnerships. And they really have formed because they want to take a new approach to management of water in the River Severn catchment, acknowledging that the decisions on too much and too little water need to take into account not just the aspects of water, but also social vulnerability, biodiversity and nature, food security, housing, economic growth. And the aim of the catchment partnership is to make the Severn catchment Britain's most vibrant and resilient river network, where an exceptional quality of life, prosperous local economies, and an outstanding natural environment is driven by a programme of innovation to reduce flood risk, secure future water resources, and improve and deliver shared natural assets. Throughout the year, to give you a little bit of context, throughout the year the river faces too much and too little water. The catchment provides drinking water for around 6 million people and is important for food production and food security within the UK. It produces around £7 billion worth of food products annually. It includes just under 50,000 residential properties and just shy of 10,000 businesses that are at risk of fluvial flooding. And the annual cost of fluvial flooding in the catchment is around 28 million a year. With climate change, there's both a forecast reduction in natural available flows of around 20 to 25%, but also a modelled 1 metre rise in flood levels for the Severn by 2100. And due to the rural nature of the catchment, with large areas of protected landscape and habitats, there's an opportunity to deliver landscape-scale change, nature recovery, improve the health and well-being of communities, and attract people to live and work in this relatively rural location. And the partnership is cooperating on developing a climate-resilient strategy out to 2100. They want to take an adaptive pathways approach, defining adaptive pathways of interventions, including nature-based and community-driven solutions. They want to do that in a cooperative manner and through a process of sharing data, collectively mapping key risks and projects, system mapping in a participatory manner to understand the interdependencies between things like food, water, housing, and identify solutions using a multi-capitals approach to kind of prioritise them on a multi-objective basis. They're also examining the governance structures they'll need to make decisions on pathways in the future. The upfront investment from the plan to produce the plans is being funded from public money with a view to unlock wider finance in the future. And work is being undertaken to understand the capability, the structures, and the scale of solutions that are needed to access the funding. And just to give some examples of the interventions which are being considered, some of these images are from the Severn Valley Water Management Scheme consultation. This is in the Upper Severn catchment, which spans the English and Welsh border. And there's a series of demonstrator projects looking at things like lowland peat restoration, formation of farming cooperatives, landscape recovery for water storage, and green finance investment models. The uncertainty of the future requires us to take an adaptive pathways approach and with a range of scenarios and ensure that solutions are flexible in the future. But decisions on water management need to take account of social vulnerability, biodiversity, nature, food security, and economic growth. And therefore, the River Severn Partnership has recognised the need to have all of these stakeholders at the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise. And now, last but not least, may I welcome Mrs. Nandita Singh, who is Associate Professor of Water Management at Södertörn University in Stockholm, specializing in water and environmental management. Mrs. Singh, please.
Thank you, Fabrice, and good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to talk about today builds upon partially on what has been said by a number of speakers today as well as before. I'm going to talk about local settings because I believe, and my research has a lot focused on the local level, local settings, local communities, sometimes indigenous communities, rural communities, and what role they have to play, and I mean, where do they stand, how important are they when we talk about shared water resources. What I'm going to speak again is partially built upon a research that is an ongoing research right now, and we have several partners in that. You can see the names on the slide itself. It also builds upon my 22 years long research experience in the sector. So it's not only this research, but a number of research is built into what I'm going to speak now. And I'm going to talk about some empirical evidences connecting things, connecting arguments with what we have seen and we have found in the local settings. And I would like to begin by saying that shared water resources is not only about water per se. It is more than water. It is the land over which the water is flowing. It is also about the land under which the water exists, the groundwater. And it is also about the ecosystems and the ecosystem services that are connected to these land and water resources. So all these three go into, they should be taken into consideration when we talk about shared water resources. That's point number one that I would like to highlight. And point number two is that these shared water resources and this whole thing that I'm talking about is connected to the local communities because they are dependent for their livelihoods on these resources. At the same time, it is not only the livelihoods, it's about their cultures, their identities, it is about their epistemic ontological foundations. So the people living around they have a very human connection with the water resources around. And therefore, the local communities have the most important stake in the water resources. And we cannot really take them away from this, the whole process of managing water at the local scale. Because they are concerned with ownership, access, use, control. At one time, historically, they were perhaps the most important, but today that's the problem that we have to think about now. And then if we talk about conflicts, because from here I would like to take you to the conflict part of the story, that if we talk about cooperation, maybe we also need to step back a bit and talk about the conflicts and then see how we can solve the problems. So the conflicts around shared water, again, is not only about the water, but the conflict is about water and the land, which we have together in our research called hydroterritorial rights. So it's the conflict of the rights, hydroterritorial rights, and at the same time it's also the conflict of rights over these ecosystems and the ecosystem services that are connected to them. And why do these conflicts arise? The conflicts arise because the nice balance between the different rights that the people had at one time at the local scale get disturbed. Either because there is an external planned intervention, it might be coming from government, it might be some international organization, or it might be just a spontaneous change that comes about because societies are changing, that the development is always going on. And when there is a conflict, then this conflict is always, it has a contextual basis, which is right there in the local context. And this local context could be about the formal laws, it could be the informal laws, because the local communities have been governed by the informal laws for times immemorial. So those laws might not be fitting very well with the formal laws, so there could be conflict because of that. It could be conflict because of economic changes, the economic profit motives, the livelihood changes. There could be questions of the power equations. There is also the local knowledge that is important, the local knowledge systems that exist with the local communities, and the different kinds of values at different points of time. So given this kind of an empirical basis that we have found in our research, now the question is that how do we solve these problems? We propose a three-step strategy, at least, very, very, very broadly, because what I'm presenting now I have not gone into the details of our research and the empirical evidences per case study. But on the whole, what we can say about resolving these kinds of issues is first identify all the stakeholders. We do talk about many stakeholders. We have been talking, and that's what we've been doing. Today is the third day that we are talking about stakeholders. But identify them and their stakes, their interests, and their roles in the conflict. Because if the conflict is there, then the different stakeholders would have a role in that conflict. So identify the role they have in the conflict. And then it's equally important to analyze the context where this conflict has arisen. And finally, when we talk about a solution, how do we arrive at a solution? Then contemplate on the possible solutions through a very inclusive approach that includes all these different stakeholders, and out of which the local ones are the most important. And there should be dialogue and consensus building that has to be rooted in co-created knowledge. Co-creation of knowledge is also another theme that we have talked a bit about at this forum. Co-create the knowledge together with the local communities, and in a way it should be driven by the knowledge of the local communities. It's not like yesterday when we were listening to the opening ceremony speeches. We heard that we are invited and we are present and we feel that we are important, that's why we have been invited to be there. But in reality, we are not listened to, our perspectives are not given a voice. So it's important that they should have a voice. And at the end, I would just say that the important keywords here are that there should be trust, equity, and justice. And equity and justice should include the nature, the ecosystem as one of the parties, as one of the stakeholders, and then shared responsibilities that each one has. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now it's working. Thank you very much, Mrs. Singh. We will now go for a first round of questions, and I'll open it to the floor. Since we're running a little bit late, I will ask you to please be as concise as possible in your answers. The first question goes to you, Alejandro. You made quite a strong point on the need to have civil society inclusion or participation, at least in basin organization processes, or at least in transboundary water cooperation processes. My question to you is, how do we make sure that basin organization and decision makers more globally pick up actually on the inputs of civil society?
Right.
Please.
Thank you, Fabrice. And I think it's something that was repeated by my colleagues here that continue, in this panel. I think it's an issue not only of legitimacy to reflect upon, that and really make sure that the voices are included and the civil society is engaged. It has something to do with basic principles of democracy, with basic principles of human rights, with a realization, I will say, of the fact that diplomacy and, let's say, and water diplomacy might be decided by diplomats and agreements by being negotiated by career diplomats. But for them to be effective, at the end of the day, you need the understanding, you need the agreement, you need the engagement, you need the involvement of civil society. And if you understand that in order for agreements to be effective, and at the end of the day, diplomacy and cooperation to deliver on what they are meant for, you will realize that automatically you will have to engage with civil society. For me, it's a simple formula. And in basic, so to say, rules of democracy and society, it should be an automatic, so to say, simple, solution. Include people, because at the end of the day, diplomacy is not only for the states, it's for the people that live in the states.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We hope it's not just another tick the box for for these organizations or for leaders, but it's really a genuine integration of civil society's involvement. Audrey, the next question is to you. You spoke a lot about the work that Terrace does, the visualization of system, the modeling. My question is, since we are concentrated on RBOs or on basin organizations, how did your work actually, was it picked up by basin organizations? How do you then transmit or communicate the outcomes of your research to basin organizations?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. Well, the project we had using that methodology was at the local level, but obviously the river basin organizations were also involved, because even if it was at local level, it was integrated in a whole basin. So I would say that actually we have, at least in 2 of the 3 countries we have worked in, we had a selection of a group of what we called the moderators, moderators that have actually engaged to lead the process locally and to, have a long-term guidance also to gather the stakeholders. And in 2 of the 3 cases, one of the moderators was from a river basin organization. And I think that's been really crucial also to actually integrate it also the local level with a bit more of a regional level. So they were definitely joining as river basin organizations, but focused on one specific part of the river. And it has been quite well picked up because I could not promise that it is still the case now, but the feedback that we got a few weeks later, after that we finished that mapping of the system, which was quite an intensive process going between 7 and 9 months, our local partners informed us that this mapping was actually printed and was hanged in one of the office of the River Basin organization, so that they could also relate it to that. So that was quite a nice example also of how the River Basin organization was feeling involved also at that local level.
Okay, thank you very much, Audrey. My next question is to you, Mrs. Paredes. You spoke of ACTO, of course, which covers a huge region, actually, and many countries in Latin America. What do you see as the main challenges, actually, for ACTO, especially in the face of the changes that we are all experiencing?
Well, I think there are several challenges for sure, and one constant challenge that we face around the world, but Latin America is very special on that. It's the political instability that we have in the region. But to face that, we need those bases for strengthening legal and technical frameworks within the regions, and working with strengthening the local, national, and regional capacities at the different levels. It's not just about technical knowledge, it's about innovation approaches as well. And I think it's very important that there's a knowledge and a sensibilization that the agendas should be flexible as well. What today could be or is a priority and should be approached with an XX certain policy, maybe in a couple of years we have to change it due to all the political, economical, and environmental challenges that we're facing around the world. So a lot of dialogue, that's something that we have experienced at ACTO. We have constant dialogues with the countries because we have new teams, new governments that are coming and going. And we should not stop putting on the table these important topics and putting as well in these conversations that it's the multi-actor, the stakeholders are engaged at the different levels, that even if we're talking about water, it's not just water, that it has several other topics and important themes that should be connected. And I think one of the biggest challenges and that was given us to ACTO as well in the President Summit that I talked to you before is to put together and to give a voice to all these agendas to the local communities, local, traditional, tribal, and even not contacted communities that we have at the region. As it was said yesterday at the opening ceremony, and one of the colleagues here addressed it right now, it's like we should listen to those voices, we should respect those voices, and we should get the trust and engage them. Some of the projects are not successful because we don't engage the people that really have the need to manage these resources at the basis of the basins.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, their inclusion, and that's a point I would like to pick up with you, Kim, in the examples you gave, in particular also the water schools. How do you ensure that minorities are or tribal persons are or representatives are actually included in the projects that you are leading, especially in these two countries, Ecuador and Peru?
Thank you. Yes, that's a good question. I want to stress first that, because it resonates a lot with our project as well, is like the governance model that the project tries to develop and implement. It's really about people. People are central. So including as much different groups as possible is like one of the main objectives of the model, of the project. So yes, I mentioned it already during my presentation. Women have been a focal point of the past year to get as much different voices from women across the catchment on board. And now, actually, this year we've started, there's only one part in the catchment that has a lot of indigenous communities. We started working with government and with indigenous organizations to include, to start a dialogue, really, to get to know each other, get to know how we can best work with them without having assumptions at the start. And yeah, it's an ongoing work. So we just started, but it's a definite priority for the coming year to include. So my colleagues there, they started working with government to develop. I don't remember how they call it. It's kind of life plans with different communities to share their visions on water management, on how they see it fit within the bigger transboundary catchment, because yeah, that's the basic starting point. Yeah, really.
Thank you, Kim. We then moved to an example in the UK, Louise, and I was wondering how the Severn catchment is relevant actually to other basins in the UK and perhaps also to other countries.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I mean, we start with its relevance to the UK. The basin scale adaptive pathways approach is part of a kind of UK national pilot to test how adaptive pathways can be applied in both flood risk and wider water systems. And part of what we're doing really is setting some of the key aspects of this adaptive pathways approach, for example, and communicating what works, but crucially where we fail. And often we're not that honest, I think, sometimes about where we fail, and this is a real opportunity. And so an example of some of the things that we're testing are the scale at which we apply these adaptive pathways. So the scale of kind of too generic versus too detailed. At what scale is engagement possible? At what scale do we need to operate in order to have solutions and schemes that are financeable? And then just onto the kind of international context and international sharing. As we have learned from others, and we've learned from things like the World Bank, water diagnostic work that's been done in Ethiopia quite recently. We've learned from the international treaty between Canada and the US on the Columbia River Basin and how they've kind of managed water across that boundary. We hope that others will learn from the work that the River Severn has done both within the UK but also around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, the question of how, whether working examples can actually be reproduced in others, because Mr. O'Quinn actually began his keynote speech by saying that, we have to take in really the context, the specific context. So the question to you, Mrs. Singh, is really your research focused on specific contexts. Do you see the research you've done and the results that came out of this research as relevant also for others? I mean, you picked up a few relevant streams or words that probably apply to all of them, but how are these examples really relevant for other transboundary contexts?
Thank you very much for a very relevant question that is very relevant and central to this session. I would like to answer it by saying that we have to think in terms of the connection between micro-catchments and macro-catchments, micro-basins and macro levels of basins. So or when we talk about transboundary cooperation and transboundary rivers or transboundary lake basins, then ultimately, and we could then see it in two parts, right? One is about the water and the nature part of it, and the other is the people's part of it. So if we just look at the water bodies, then these micro catchments are contributing to the main river basin, right? So the water in the river is because it is coming from the micro catchments. Now suppose I will now come to one of the case studies because I did not talk about them. This case study from India that constituted my research. It is about a lake, and there are two groups here, two groups of stakeholders, two stakeholders, one is farmer and the fishers. Now the farmers, they are heavily influenced by the economic or the profit motive in present times, and they are promoted by the industry behind them. They are promoted to grow certain crops that need the lake water to be drained out. So now this is a very difficult situation. So what happens is after the rains, when the lake is supposed to be filled with water, they force the local administration to drain the water out. So the lake doesn't have water and just flows out, and obviously it goes into the sea. So that water which should have been in the lake goes through a river and down into maybe the Bay of Bengal. So then what happens? So we are losing the water resources, and if we are now trying to make, for example, a treaty with the Ganges, with the neighboring country, and we are grappling with this issue of too much water or too little water, and we don't have a good management at an upstream level within a basin that is connected to this river Ganges, then obviously the cooperation is not going to work. And there would be if these kinds of conflicts are there in several of these micro catchments around that contribute to river Ganges, then how can we expect that we'll have a good cooperation result? That is one thing of it. And secondly, if we have these different kinds of conflicts, and today suppose that there is a transboundary agreement, a transboundary cooperation, or even a national level of cooperation regarding a river that is mainly flowing through one country. Today, seemingly there is no conflict, but tomorrow, because the local stakeholders were never considered, their voices were never heard. So what would happen is that tomorrow a conflict will arise. So we have, for example, the case from Bolivia, which is the Misikuni Dam. The Misikuni Dam was constructed without really considering the perspective of the local Quechua community, which has a very living relationship with the river. Their identity, their culture, their entire epistemic ontological foundations are based on this river, but they were not considered, and today there is conflict. So in order to have peace, in order to have peaceful resolution, and in order to prevent conflicts, there is need to consider this local, or what we have been earlier talking about, a bottom-up approach, a truly bottom-up approach that starts and rests a lot upon the local people and the knowledge systems and how that can be integrated. Because earlier we have heard, for example, that the local communities they have a very good knowledge about the local ecosystem and water, and as my colleague said a few minutes back, the nature and water are not, they cannot be separated out, they are not isolated, so they are connected into one integrated whole. So for both these reasons, I think the findings that I presented are very, very relevant for transboundary cooperation or for other kinds of cooperation at a higher level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Singh. And now we'd like to open it to the floor. If some of you have questions, it's the moment. Please just state your name and whom you represent, and may I ask you to keep it as short as possible. Thank you. We'll then open also to pick up a few questions from our viewers online, if there are any questions. So please, I see a hand raised there.
Close the hand.
Thank you very much for the panelists. Really, it's very rich presentations and experience. But here I would like, if it is possible, to correlate what's been presented by the panelist with the keynote speaker. He focused on certain pillars for the cross-boundary cooperation and management. And I'm wondering whether the experience presented from your side is really matched with some point or bullet which has been said by Mr. Kiran, the Metric Director. Thank you.
To whom would you like to to ask that. Is anybody feeling like he or she is the one concerned the most? Alejandro, maybe? or not?
Yeah. The thing is, I don't want to go back to the issue of civil society and participation, because I think I've said enough of that. An engagement of civil society and stakeholders, in river basin organizations, and how much they contribute to legitimacy in terms of decision making and effectiveness of cooperation. What I wanted perhaps to complement, if you allow me, because I think your question was quite broad, is an issue that has to do with, which was tackled by the keynote speaker and was referred to by some of my colleagues here, which is the different jurisdictions of a river basin. A river basin which is shared by states has always, to deal with jurisdictions between states and within states, right? Provincial, subnational, local, municipalities, and so on and so forth, in which you have different administrative divisions, different decision-making processes, different stakeholders being engaged, and so on and so forth. And I think, if I may, perhaps to complement what the keynote speaker said, or what I said, and what some of you also said, one of the main challenges that we are facing in terms of diplomacy, cooperation, and river basin organizations is how do we bring some consistency and some order into that dispersion of different jurisdictions, administrative divisions, different stakeholders, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the key challenges that I see for river basin organizations in the future. We have seen that, I have seen that in Africa, in Latin America. You propose a new approach, you propose a new institution, immediately the question and the comment that comes after is, moment, and my ministry and my agency, how are we going to coordinate that with the local level, the subnational level, and between the states level? That's one of the most important things that we need to think about. And the stakeholders in all these subdivisions, in all these administrative and governance arrangements have to be pondered upon very carefully. That's what I would like to say. But probably you will have something more to say.
I think that was already quite an answer, Alejandro. I'll just note that other speakers should not, but I'd really like to encourage others to ask a question. We still have about 12, 13 minutes. I see another hand there.
Yes, thank you. My name is Yasir Muhammad from Sudan. My question is also referring to the first keynote speaker, because he nicely highlights six points. And I want to reflect that to two important events on transboundary river basin that occurred this year. The signing of MOU between Turkey and Iraq on Euphrates River, and the ratification of the CFA last week on the Nile. These two river basins are highly tense river basins. The one between Iraq and Turkey was very much inclusive, the whole domain of political economy. I mean, water is one of more than 20 MOUs. While the one on the Nile is, let us sign the agreement and seek for cooperation afterwards. So the question is, which one could lead to cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The keynote.
The question is picked up from the keynote's presentation, but does anybody feel comfortable in answering this question? Mr. O'Quinn, you.
Well, look, I suppose it's easy to do the MOU bit. That's the easy bit. And one of the problems with RBOs, and if you look at India, Pakistan, or inside Pakistan, that the initial MOU or the initial piece of legislation is too narrow. So as the years go by, you can't be opportunistic. You can't find it because it's too narrow. So if the MOU, I don't know either MOU or either agreement, but what I always say to anyone planning these things is ensure you have a broad mandate. So you have two mandates generally. One is the peace process mandate, which says, or the international relations mandate, which says this agreement exists to improve the relations between these two countries or this region or whatever. And that gives legitimacy to sort of a creeping expansion over the years, and the other one should be a narrower one based on water and all of that. What's missing from all of these is the overtly political dimension. The Omanis have a water system that's lasts for 1,000 years called the Falaj system. And the Falaj system is very important because it's based on the system itself. They always say what nature or God provides is the flow. We can't control that, but we can control the system. And the system is based on equity of access and equality. So no matter what comes through the flow, equally with these RBO agreements, what we work on, we see politics as the flow. Politics comes and goes, all these things. But once your system is resilient and able to adapt to that dynamically to the changes, the up and downs over the years, it's what happens. So in both cases, the MOU is a starting bit. Actually, what happens is how we can play with these MOU languages over the years to move them forward. And so it'll depend on actually the human beings involved in it. As with all of these things, and I know we talk about systems a lot, is that processes aren't peace, Falages aren't flow. It's human agency at the end of the day. It's human beings, civil servants on both sides who know each other and work with each other, and no MOU can actually write those out. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but you need to have those parts as part of the MOU.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, please.
Hi, Sergio Campos from the Inter-American Development Bank. I just wanted to complement something. One of the purposes of this session was what are the roles of the RBOs? How can the RBOs make a difference? And in the keynote, it was also said, water can be used for peace or for cooperation, either way. And in the question that it was placed is, I think that the RBOs have a role. It's going to happen anyway, but when we have an RBO and a strengthened RBO, our chances of making cooperation and peace move forward are greater than not. And I think that that's when we have an RBO, we have better chances to move forward.
Would any one of our panelists like to react to that? Please.
Thank you, Sergio. Yes, it as you were saying, the keynote speaker, it gives a framework, and it gives a legal and institutional framework for all the countries with the same vision on a specific topic, and that's a huge strength in order to move forward for regional policy, either if it's and you can take whatever topic, it's within that framework. And from that on, you can build peace processes, you can build common agendas, you can move and work on regional public policies, especially if there's also this political will and this engagement from the different levels, starting from the national, local, the communities, and as well, then it's easier to work as a region and to put on the table topics that are common, because we in NACTO, we represent the Amazon, but for sure what I'm listening here, we are all facing the same problems in a larger or in a smaller scale. At the community level, local level, even if it's a federal state, we're all facing the same things. So I think to have these strong frameworks moving forward, legal and institutional, regional visions and collaborative agendas That's one of the strong things that at the RBOs we can move forward in order to have more inclusive processes and to have this and move to these peaceful strategies as well. I mean, the regional work, I think, set the basis for peace building processes as well.
I would like to add to this by saying that RBOs are, yes, definitely very important, and they do need to have a very play a very effective role. And I've also been thinking about structuring of the RBOs, which could be like from centralized down to very decentralized. So if we could have a hierarchy of RBOs, whether that is formalized or informal, I'm not going into that. It could depend on the context and how it could be built. But definitely we should have the RBO structures, and that is kind of decentralized, so that if we have decentralized RBO arrangements, institutionalized in that sense, then it will be easier and much more possible to give effective space and to make it possible for the local communities to really voice their needs, their interests, and I mean the way that they could have some control over the situation, bring in their knowledge, and so the whole thing could become much more effective if we have this kind of different tiers of RBOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, unfortunately, one more question, and we would like to give the opportunity also for our online viewers to ask a question. I was told there is a question, so please.
The question is from Claudia Prain online. A question for the panelists in general. You have highlighted the importance of civil society, the challenges associated with stakeholder engagement. She wants to know your thoughts on the role of youth organizations and how they can play a role in transboundary water diplomacy. While it's often acknowledged that youth should really be included because it's their future at stake, how can we practically ensure meaningful youth participation in these high-level diplomatic spaces, and what specific role do you think youth organizations should take on to contribute effectively to these processes?
Thank you. A short and concise question, but one that is pretty clear as far as the topic is concerned. Maybe Kim?
Yeah, well, they are telling me what to tell you. Yes, while we are not yet working specifically with youth organizations, yes, the Water School is a great opportunity to involve them. But I also believe that I've been at a couple of stakeholder assemblies, and there have been young people from communities already present. So it's not a necessity to have the water schools to be able to involve youth already. And then aside from that, I know that the really local work with communities often involves work with environmental clubs from schools. So also already from the very lowest scale there, they are definitely involved. It's a matter of scale, of bringing them up to that higher scale that is still needed, and but definitely a lot of opportunities there to do that. I don't know if that answers the question a little bit.
I think it does. Does anyone, maybe Louisa, you wanted to add to that?
I'm happy to add to that. I mean, not specifically to the River Severn, but I just wanted to highlight a Welsh example. So in Wales, we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The Act is fairly innovative in looking at including conversations about long-term resilience, long-term equity into legislation and policy across Wales. And one of the programs which they run is something called the Future Leaders Programme, where they identify and nominate people who are active across different sectors and invite them to be future leaders in relation to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and include and incorporate their views in discussions around policy, and that's both water policy, but also policy on land management, policy on healthcare. And I think that's a great opportunity really to have a youth, to bring in the youth view, but also have the youth represent different communities across the country as well.
Thank you for that. And unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I'd like to thank you very much for your attendance and invite you to please applaud our speakers. Thank you very much. Really, you've done a great job. Tomorrow we have one more session of the seminar, shared water resources for cooperation for peace and cooperation. Shared water resource for peace and cooperation. That's the title of our seminar. We have our workshop tomorrow at 11, and I invite you to join if you'd like to pursue this conversation. Room 26. Thank you for that. Thank you all. Enjoy your afternoon and see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.